I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, what should I start with when I'm mixing? In other words, they're asking, should I start with kick and then bass? Like, should I bring in all the drums together? I can't tell you. The answer is never the same thing all the time. It's actually completely different every single song I work on. And this is by design. I don't want to do things the same all the time because I value the creativity part of mixing. If you want a great mix, you need to be excited about the song. You need to be excited about the song when you're done. And if you have a method about the way you're working, that's the worst way to get into a habit of never being excited about what you're doing. Because just by doing the same things the same way all the time, you've taken a huge part of the creative fire out of it. So the biggest thing that I learned here, right, is start with everything in is like my go-to way to start mixing. And then what I mute out is going to be because it may be getting in the way of something I'm trying to work on. All right. So pattern wise, I start with everything in. I get the balance right, volume balance and panning. Get that right out the gate because that will tell you what to do with your EQ. You're not going to know what moves to make on EQ until the balance is right. A lot of times you may be cranking the mids on the EQ when you could have just raised the fader a 2 dB and get the same result, right? If you're cranking the mids 5 dB, raise the fader 5 dB and see if it's the same thing because you'll cause a lot less damage and it will actually be a better result usually in the end just by getting your volumes right way before you reach for EQ. All right, so panning and volumes are set. Also, my mix bus is set. Whatever's going to be on there is set from the beginning before I start mixing. This isn't called top-down mixing in my book. It's called the way to mix because I'm never trying to do things over again. This is the same reason why I won't mix the drums first and then the bass and then the guitars. Like I don't have a method like that because I found when I worked that way, I would always have to go back and adjust things every time I get them right. Like I'd get the drums right, then the bass right. Or then I'd add guitars and I'd be like, oops, got to go back and switch the way the bass sounds a little, mess with the EQs to fit the guitars in there to make it fit right. Okay, now the vocal, got to now move this stuff out of the way to get that to fit. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of a bench full of people. That's what your mix is. Fit every piece of every instrument you have on that bench, and the bench is only yay big, right? So what do? If you put things in one at a time, then by the time you get to whatever's at the end, maybe it's the vocals, now all of a sudden they're not going to sit right. They will have to be half up on one dude's leg and, sitting kind of sideways just to get them to fit on that bench. It's never going to be a comfortable, good fit. Whereas if you start with everything in, then everything sort of moves into position and gets situated in a way that works from the beginning. And since everything has to live together when the mix is done, you might as well start working on that from the jump. That's just how I look at it, because this will prevent you from going back. Now, what I was saying before is maybe I'll mute out the guitars if I'm trying to work on the bass and the drums together if the guitars are in the way. But then I'll put them right back in as soon as I'm done tweaking whatever I was tweaking, okay? But without the volume balance right, you don't got nothing. And let me say this. 99 Problems, an amazing song by Jay-Z, produced by Rick Rubin, mixed by Andrew Sheps. Now, Andrew Sheps has talked about this a few times. He's mixing it on a Neve console with 28 channels. 4 of them are not working, and he's got 24 channels, and the only pieces of outboard gear he's using is one 1176 on Jay-Z's vocal and a Fatso on the drums. Okay, the drums during the choruses only, mind you. He's got no mix bus processing on this entire thing, all right? What does this mean? It means that if you go in thinking, I always need this and I always need that, you would never get to a point where you could have a really simple mix that sounds amazing because you're just in a habit of overcomplicating everything. So I'm not saying that, and by the way, there's no automation on that song at all either. So no automation and one piece of outboard gear on the vocal and one piece on the drums in the choruses only. You would never ever achieve that if you go in thinking everything needs the same thing. Okay, so realize how great that song is, and the reason it's great is the balance. Listen to Al Schmidt mixes. The reason these songs are amazing is the balance. There's so much attention paid to the balance. All right. So every time you think to yourself, I'm doing things the same, just everything you might be doing the same, I want you to change on the next mix, okay? And on your mix bus, I want you to change out your mix bus plugins that you rock on the mix bus every month or so. If you mix enough songs in a month, you could do it every month or so. If you don't mix that many songs in a month, do it every 3-4 months. But the point is, just changing the way the mix bus plugins just changing them up is going to give you a little more creativity and fire, because it's going to create a different result just from the simple act of there's something different there now. So now you have to mix a little different in order to get the result you're looking for. And this will open up doorways in your head to how to achieve different things also. Never get into habits, okay? In my outboard gear, when you buy outboard gear, you're going to probably use it maybe the same way every time, roughly. I mean, there's like a way that works. And I've experimented with my outboard gear, but using it in the same way that I use it now works the best. So that doesn't change for me. But what does change is my mix bus plugins in Pro Tools. They will change, and the order could change. In other words, sometimes EQ into compression, sometimes compression into EQ. Switch up little things like this, and you'll get wildly different results, and it will cause you to mix different, because your ears is what's creating the end result anyway. So it doesn't really matter what you use. Your decision making is going to be what gets you there or not. All right. So trust me, switching things up like that will be hugely helpful for you. It'll also make you not reliant on any one thing, which is a great way to get better. All right. Now, also, let's say this. If you're going down the path of something to be the same all the time, I think it's important to always start with mix bus processing on, because that prevents you from going back in time. And like, once you get everything right, now you add the mix bus processing, makes no sense, because then everything's going to sound different, and now you're chasing your tail again. So whatever you do put on the mix bus, however you change it up, whatever, just get it from the beginning set in a certain way, and then just mix into it. That's how you should roll. You shouldn't ever roll by putting that on last. It's the worst way to work of all time, okay? Another thing, I noticed a question, and I don't want to do a whole video on it, so I'll just go real quick. People mentioned, how do I set up the sidechain high-pass filter on, on a compressor to be able to keep the low end not triggering the detector and get more low end in the mix, while the compression is also, working on the mid-range and high end, and not just getting eaten up by the low end. The answer for that is that's an internal side chain. So you would need to use a compressor that actually has that feature on it. It's not the same as using the side chain to be triggered by other elements that you're sending to it. In other words, very common thing is to duck the bass a little every time the kick hits. So you're sending your kick to the side chain and you're putting that compressor on a bass. So every time the kick hits, because the key input is the kick on that bass compressor, it'll duck every time the kick hits, it'll duck it down. That's not the same. That's an external side chain, and we're talking about an internal side chain, which means to do what I'm explaining, to keep the low end out of the detector, you need a compressor that has that on it. It'll say side chain or SC, HPF, high pass filter. You'll be able to dial it in, usually anywhere between like 90 and even up to 150 hertz is okay. Like, I use 125 on my gear because that's how it's set, but that's how it's set on the gear. Like, there's a button for it and it's at 125. I don't have the option to move it. But when I'm messing with SSLs, G-Bus comp, you have the option to set it. And sometimes I might go a little lower. But like I said, 90 hertz up to about 150 is a good zone. All right. I don't usually bring it up any higher than that. So in my opinion, that's a good zone. All right. So take this stuff with you. Do me a favor. If you got stuff that you constantly switch up and that makes your mixes better, I want to hear about it. All right. Also, if you do the same things all the time that always work for you, I want to hear about those too. Even though I might not agree, I still want to hear it. Yeah. Hope others can find that useful, and I'll definitely find that useful. Maybe I'll add it to my flow. All right. Thanks for watching. You guys got this. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys seriously got this. Take it easy.